Okay, so Daniel 11, so we're going to start by remembering last week. So last week in chapter 10, remember we got the vision of the angel while Daniel was standing on the banks and he had these angels appear to him. And we learned that there is a spiritual battle going on that we are unaware of a lot of the times. Okay, but Daniel got kind of a little peek behind the curtain, and so he got to see what was going on the spiritual end of things. And so we have this unnamed angel who is giving this prophecy and this vision to Daniel, okay? And he tells him about this war that is going to happen, okay? So that is what the rest of Daniel is. Chapter 11 and 12 is about this continual war that will take place for the country of Israel. Now remember, in Daniel's time, when he's standing there receiving that vision, Israel is just a little tiny baby again, okay? They're just starting to rebuild. They're just starting to send exiles back. They're just starting to rebuild the city and the temple and their walls and all of this stuff and fortify it, okay? But God sees all the way to the end and all of the different events in between and what was going to happen to the people of Israel, where they were going to basically be a pawn in an all-out chess game war, okay? So they were going to get handed back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. This was going to cause a lot of anxiety and frustration. If you've ever been there and the Lord is like, you know, you're getting passed around sometimes in life and you're just going from one thing to one thing, there's all this anxiety. This is what Israel was getting ready to experience. And before they were going to go through that, God was going to remind them that he was going to be there every step of the way. That he already knew every single thing that was going to happen and they would not be exiled again. So that was this other promise that they were never going to have their whole country taken away again. Even though they would be passed around a lot, even though there would be a lot of fighting, he wasn't going to exile them again, okay? So this is that promise of, you're going to be in the middle of a war, but don't worry, I'm here for you, okay? All right, so we have history in Daniel 11. So we're going to start off remembering Alexander the Great, okay? So we have Alexander. And what happens after Alexander the Great dies is his entire kingdom, remember, he owns like half the world at the point of his death. Okay, so he does not leave an heir behind. And so his 4 generals kind of rise up over the years and they kind of take his different pieces of his kingdom. All right, so we have Antigonus. And then we have 2 very important ones that we're going to talk about. We have Cassander, okay? But then we have 2 that rise up. And these 2 become the most important ones. Ptolemy and Seleucus. Okay. All right, so these become very important. These are kind of on the outskirts. They have a lot of wars and stuff going on, but the reason why these 2 are important is because Israel falls as a buffer state in between them. And Israel is going to get passed back and forth between these 2 kingdoms multiple times over about 375 years. So they're this little pawn that's going to get taken back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. And basically, whoever is the reigning champion gets hold of Israel. Okay, so Israel literally gets in this tug of war between these 2 dominions. And we found out last week that these are going to be called the king of the north, and the Ptolemies are the king of the south. So we're going to read a lot about that, and we're going to follow the history line, okay? Ptolemy is Egypt, so that would be south of Israel. And these are in Syria mostly. Okay? So in relationship to Israel, remember that's where you're grounding yourself. We're in Israel, the king to the north and the king to the south, and you're in between. Okay? So this is where we're going to orient ourselves. Alright, so let's start in verse 6 of chapter 11. Okay, and it says, after some years they shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure. But she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. Okay? So the prophecy continues. We've set up the king of the north and the south, and what's going to happen between the two of them over the next couple hundred years. So it said that they're going to be allies for a little while, and then joined by marriage, but the arrangement's not going to last. Okay? So history tells us that this happens. So what we're going to do as we walk through it is we're going to talk about the prophecy, and then we're going to talk about the history that actually happened, the fulfillment of the prophecy. But remember, in Daniel's time, this hasn't happened yet. We're fast forwarding. Okay? So, we have Antiochus II, who comes out of this kingdom. Okay? And we have Ptolemy II. It's kind of nice because their numbers almost line up. So we have a Ptolemy II, we have an Antiochus II, who rise at the same time. Ptolemy II has a daughter, and her name is Bernice. Okay? So these two join in marriage. Okay? And for a time, they're allies, and they get along really, really well. Up until Ptolemy II dies in 282 BC. 282 BC. Okay? Now, once Ptolemy II dies, okay, Antiochus II realizes that he doesn't have to stay married, okay, because the person that he made the agreement with is dead, so the arrangement's dead, right? So he puts away Bernice, and he takes his first wife, okay, Laodicea, okay? So he was married beforehand, divorced her, and then married Bernice, all right? So he takes back his former wife. Well, she doesn't trust her husband because she sees what's going on, and so she has him poisoned. Okay? She has him poisoned. Okay, so he dies, and then she has Bernice killed, and her son, and all of her attendants. Okay, they're all killed. Okay? And then she sets up her son. Okay? She sets her son, Seleucus II. Okay? So he is now reigning over Syria. And because he's now in charge, he grabs Israel. Okay? So every time somebody comes up to power, they snatch for Israel right away. Okay? So Israel gets sent over to them. Alright. So let's read verses 7 through 10. And from a branch from her roots, one shall arise in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north. And he shall deal with them and shall prevail. He shall also carry off to Egypt their gods with the metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold. And for some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, and shall be returned to his own land. His son shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflowing and pass through. And again he shall carry the war as far as his fortress. Okay? So it tells us that a branch would come from the south, okay, and prevail over the kings of the north. Okay, so this happens in 245 to 241. Ptolemy III, he rises up. Okay? He is the brother of Bernice. So he's her brother. So he sees everything that's happening, and he witnesses what's going on, and so he decides to gather an army and go after the other kingdom. Okay, so 245 to 241. There's a war that goes on. Okay? And he is avenging his sister's murder. Okay? And he is attacking Syria and going after them. Okay? So then the sons of the kings of the north would continue to battle, and one son would conquer the Holy Land. Okay? So then this guy has two sons. They were real original with their names, right? We're just counting off, right? Seleucus III and Antiochus III. Okay, so these are his two sons, all right? Now, they were successful generals, but unfortunately, this guy dies, okay, leaving his younger brother in charge, okay? he takes back the Holy Land from Egypt. Okay, so Ptolemy came and got it from Syria, and then he comes back and he gets it. I told you there's a lot of back and forth, back and forth. They're fighting over the Holy Land. Okay, so that's what happened. Verse 11 tells us, then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north. And he shall rise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. Okay? So the king of the south is our Ptolemy line, would attack and meet a great multitude of soldiers from the king of the north. The king of the north would lose in battle, and his multitude would be defeated. Okay? So in 217 BC, Antiochus III was defeated in a very famous battle called the Battle of Rapha. Okay? And because of this loss, he was forced to give back Israel to the Ptolemies. Okay, so now they have control of Israel. He was absolutely just desecrated. Okay, this was an awful, awful battle that happened, and at the end of it, one of the things that happened is that Israel got sent back into the hands of the king of the south. Okay? Alright, verse 13.
Because they're not going into exile, they're still staying in what's their homeland.
Yeah.
They're just king,
Right.
the ruler.
So
is back and
whoever's
forth.
in control and power and has political power over
Is giving
them.
them the laws. They have to
Yes.
follow.
So they're still people, but their ruler is changing every couple of years. But it is literally different dominions that are taking them over. So Egypt, Syria, and it's just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So they're still Israel, and they still have their temple going on, they still have their sacrifices, but imagine every couple of years you're trading hands, you know. Not like our presidency, but literally the entire government.
Culture changes every 2 years.
Culture changes, yes, everything. So their laws, taxations, everything happens every time it gets changed, So God is going to tell them, you're going to be your own people, but I'm going to tell you you're just a pawn in this whole big mess that's going on, okay? But it was probably pretty fearful for them, these are future people who would be able to experience this, that every time a kingdom was going to rise to power, you were fearful that an exile was going to happen again. You know, it's not the first time they've been exiled to Egypt. Egypt was one of the players in this. It was very likely that they were going to get exiled again, okay? So yeah, this is happening back and forth and back and forth. But they're still a country, they're still their own people, they're just getting traded hands.
But they're fighting for them for the land, not, I mean,
The land and the people. But okay. Israel doesn't have its own army. Okay? And the land around there is basically an oasis. And they have the temple and they have all these different fortified cities. They have lots of resources and they're not defending themselves. So they're basically getting passed around to bigger, stronger armies. Yeah. Okay. Verse 13. For the king of the north shall again rise a multitude greater than the first, and after some years he shall come on with a great army and abundant supplies. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. We have these armies who keep rising up, and Israel isn't defending themselves. Okay, and those times many shall rise against the king of the south, and the violent among you, your own people, shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. So there's a little bits of attempts because they're tired of getting back and forth, but they're going to fail. Okay. Then the king of the north shall come and throw up siege works and take a well-fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. But he who comes against him shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, that's Israel, with destruction in his hand. Okay? So, the northern kingdom would answer back to this defeat. Okay? In an extended siege, a very long time. And the victory would be given to the king of the north. Okay? And they would retain the Holy Land. So, in 201 BC, Antiochus III decides that he's going to go invade Egypt. Okay? He wants back Israel and he wants back his honor. So he goes and he invades Egypt. And he actually ends up gaining control of Israel. So Israel's back over here now. Okay? The Jews who were living in this land, they decided to rise up and help Antiochus III because they do not want to go back to Egypt. Okay? They spent 400 plus years in Egypt. They do not want to go to Egypt. They have a bad taste in their mouth from Egypt. Okay? Syria at this time has pretty much left them alone. You know, we have some of the Assyrians and things like that, but Syria's kind of pretty much left them alone. So they throw their eggs over here in this basket, and they rise up to try to defeat Egypt. Okay? Now,
This is after the Assyrians were this is after Jonah, right?
yes, this is way after. We're hundreds of years later.
So Syria's kind of
Assyria's
mellow.
kind of like divided, so we're a little bit Syria, we're a little bit other countries. They've kind of divided up and kind of broken down a little bit. Yeah,
Not as vicious as they once were.
absolutely not. No. Syria's kind of rising out of it, but it's not as big and as bad as Assyria was. Yeah. They tried some different tactics. And not just like, you know, let's hang everybody on the walls and, you know, murder everybody. It's like, we can try some government work. You know, try some
More flies with
diplomacy.
honey as opposed.
Yeah, yeah. They're a little nicer. They're still, you know, they've got some might behind them, but they're a little nicer people.
I don't
So-
think I ever realized how violent and
Yeah,
they
violent
just-
history
I
war.
mean, they just chop people's heads off and toss them over holes. And
Skin them alive, throw their skins up on the wall.
I
Yeah.
don't think I ever really realized that.
So Syria's a little nicer than Babylon and the Assyrians. They're a lot nicer than Egypt, because remember, Egypt wants to come and just enslave them again. Okay, so they're like, okay, we know our history, we're not going here, so we're gonna put our backing over here. Well, it ends up, you know, not being the wisest decision, okay, we're gonna say that, because these people turn out to be not so nice, okay? They come in very nice, they come in, hey, we're just gonna take your resources, but we're gonna leave you alone. We don't wanna do what Egypt did to you, but it doesn't really turn out that way, okay? Lots of great promises that don't come to fulfillment, okay? So Antiochus III actually ends up blaming the Holy Land for this war and goes to war against Israel, okay? Because he's gonna put all the blame for all of this back and forth on Israel, okay? So he unleashes destruction upon Israel and the people. All right, verse 17 says, he shall set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring terms of an agreement and perform them. He shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage. Okay, so the king of the north now has rule over the Holy Land, but he would attempt to dominate and destroy and wipe out the kingdom of the south. Okay, so now he's got control of the Holy Land, he's got all of this land, he's going to wage war again on Egypt. But we're going to try something different this time. We're going to try again a marriage, because that seemed to work for a little while. Okay, so in 193 BC, okay, Antiochus III gives away his daughter, Cleopatra, not that Cleopatra. She is the first Cleopatra. She is an ancestor of the more famous Cleopatra, who would come about 100 years later. Okay, but so his daughter is Cleopatra, and he decides to give his daughter in marriage to Ptolemy V. Okay, Ptolemy V of Egypt, in hopes that not only would they have an alliance, but he would kind of gain some more control in Egypt, okay? He did this as a strategy. Now, I'm going to blow your mind. This is not me, this is history. Anybody want to know how old Cleopatra was when she was married? I'll tell you how old Ptolemy was first. He was 17.
Something like that, she's probably like 8.
I'm thinking 8.
She was 10. Very close. She was 10 to 11. Yeah. And so she was given in marriage to the 17-year-old son of Ptolemy IV. Okay. Oops, wrong side. Okay, so she's 10 and she is being given away in marriage in the hope of an alliance and a hope of control here. Okay? It doesn't work. Antiochus III really hoped that this was going to work, and it doesn't work because she decides to be unfaithful to her husband. She is 10, y'all. She is 10, and she decides to be unfaithful to her husband. Okay? So, again, she's Cleopatra the first, technically. Another famous Cleopatra would come after her about 100 years. Okay? You wonder, she lives up to the name of her ancestor. Because Cleopatra kind of does the same thing. Okay? So she's unfaithful and it doesn't work. So let's find out what God said was going to happen and did happen. Afterward, he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall capture many of them. But a commander shall put an end to insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back on him. Then he shall turn his face back toward the fortress of his own land. He shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. Okay? So after this disappointing effort to try to get his daughter to gain control over Egypt, okay, the king of the north would then turn his efforts to the coastlands until he would be stopped, okay, and he would stumble and fall and not be found. So that's what God said was going to happen. Okay, so Antiochus III is completely devastated by this situation that happens with his daughter. Okay, he decides to turn his attention to Asia Minor and Greece, which are the coastlands. Okay, so just as God said, he turns his attention to the coastlands. And he gets a very famous general to help him out. Anybody ever heard of a guy named Hannibal? The Conqueror? He goes and helps Hannibal. So he wants to conquer these lands. Okay? Alright. So in 198 BC, okay, so there's all this fighting going on, there's all these different battles and stuff going on. By 189, a Roman comes and defeats Antiochus III in Greece. Okay, so Rome is now going to step into this battle that's going on. Okay, and this becomes a very important shift. Okay, and signs the deal against this kingdom. Okay, so Rome steps in and they go after Antiochus in Greece. Okay, so Antiochus had planned on absolutely taking over Greece with the help of Hannibal, and they do not. The tide actually turns, Rome goes after them. Okay? So at the end of the battle, Antiochus has to give up his dominion, and he also has to give up his son. Okay? Antiochus, heard this name before, the fourth. Okay? Now, when Rome conquered kingdoms, they took the next successor in line captive. Okay, so if you were king, whoever was your next successor in line was then exiled to Rome and was a prisoner. Okay, so when Rome conquered Antiochus III, he had to send his son to Rome. Okay, so he gets sent off to Rome. All right, and he's held hostage there. And after this defeat, Antiochus needs money so bad, okay, that he resorts to pillaging Babylon, okay? And this doesn't work. In 187 BC, as he's pillaging Babylon, the citizens of Babylon turn on him and murder him, okay? Because they are not going to stand for this. So he actually dies at the hands of Babylonians trying to raise money for his campaigns. So he's gone now. So he meets an end, and he shall not be found any longer. All right, verse 20 says, Then shall rise in his place one who shall send an exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. Okay? So, after the end of Antiochus III, a successor would rise, and he would try to, through the means of taxes, raise more money. Okay, so he's going to jump on this bandwagon. We need to raise more money. We need an army. We need to rebuild. We're going to raise some taxes. Okay, and he will meet a quick end. Okay, so this is fulfilled in his successors, Pericles IV. Okay, so he's the oldest son of Antiochus III, and he tries to tax the Holy Land. Okay. And tries to increase his revenues and rebuild his father's army by taxing the Holy Land. Well, they don't stand for that either. right? Just like Babylon, they're not going to stand for it either. He tries to pillage the Jerusalem temple, okay? But one of his ambassadors warned him, okay, don't do that. There's some historical documentation that his ambassador received an angelic vision of don't go after the Jerusalem temple. And he tries to warn him, don't do this, okay? This is not the people you want to mess with, okay? Well, he decides to try it anyway. He ends up failing. And in 175 BC, he's actually assassinated. Now, there's some speculation as to how this happened. We don't really know. But this guy is looking like a really good candidate. His brother. Okay, it is very possible that his brother murdered him because he wanted the throne. Okay, so there is some speculation as to what happened, but there is good proof that his brother is the one who assassinated him. Okay, through the means of somebody else, because remember he's in Rome, but it seems to point that way through history. Obviously we can't really prove it, but that's kind of the way that it points. Alright, so now, because he's dead, he's going to have a successor, and his son is Demetrius. Demetrius the First. Okay? So let's read what happens in 21. Alright. In his place shall rise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the promise, and he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. And he shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. He shall stir up his power and his heart against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for plot shall be devised against him. Even those who eat his food shall break him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. And as for the two kings, their heart shall be bent on doing evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail. For the end is yet to be at the time appointed. Okay? So, after a brief reign of the former king, okay, he doesn't last very long, the next king would be a very vile person, okay? He would be known for trickery, for deceit, for war, for bloodshed, okay? So, in 175, okay, Antiochus actually takes the throne, even though the successor, Demetrius the First, is supposed to be in Rome, right? Is supposed to be on the throne. He gets sent to Rome, okay? He is actually exchanged for his uncle, okay? And so his uncle now takes over, okay? So that means that he doesn't come to the throne legitimately. He is not the successor, okay? Demetrius is supposed to be the one who sits on the throne, but he's actually exchanged because of Roman rule now. He gets exchanged for his uncle, okay? And then it says the king of the north would attempt a deceitful covenant with the king of the south, and that this would fail, and that there would be a great battle, but no changing of power at the end of it, okay? So Antiochus IV, he carries on this feud between the two kingdoms, okay? And he feigns friendship and allegiance, okay? So literally at the same table, they're sharing lies, okay? So he's making all of these promises to the king of the south, meanwhile sending armies and making battles and wars and attacking and things like that. So he's saying one thing and doing another, okay? Now, despite all of these battles, despite all of this effort, okay, Antiochus IV doesn't stand, and he's ultimately defeated, okay? So he does not win the day. He is ultimately defeated, okay? And in 169 BC, he comes to a huge defeat against Egypt, okay? Because Egypt enlists Rome to help them. Okay? So Rome and Egypt form alliances and they go after him. They go after Antiochus IV. Okay? At the end of it all, Antiochus IV and his entire kingdom, including Israel, now gets dominated by Rome. And this is where we start in the intertestamental period, where Rome takes over Israel. Okay?
This is the point, this is
when it starts.
Rome takes over.
This is when they take over. So they are now in control of the Holy Land. Okay? So up until this point, Alexander had control first, right? And then we get passed back and forth through all of these hundreds of years to Egypt and Syria. Egypt's here, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. When Rome steps in here, it spells the end, okay? They are going against Syria. They're not going to have Greece invaded. And Egypt goes, I'll make a pretty good alliance. We could take down the kingdom of the north if we form an alliance with Rome. So that's what they do. So Egypt comes over and they form an alliance with Rome. And between the two of them, they take down Syria. And Israel now belongs to Rome.
And this starts the intertestament.
And that's 169, approximately?
About 169 BC, yep. Okay. Alright, and it says that even those who eat his food shall break him, and history tells us that Antiochus IV's own counselors aided Rome and Egypt. They sold secrets and gave away military strategies to Egypt and Rome in order to take him down. Okay, his own counselors. Alright, so now verse 28 says, and he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant. He shall work his will and return to his own land. But at the time appointed he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. For ships...
So who's the king of the north at this point?
We're talking about Antiochus IV. Yes.
Still.
So he's defeated,
Okay.
but he's not dead. So he's still in control of Syria and a couple of regions that Israel was given over to Rome.
Okay.
Yeah. So Egypt said, good job, Rome. I'm going to give you Israel. Yeah. So he's still kind of king, but he's very, very defeated, very wounded. He's like, not physically, but he's very taken down a notch. Okay. So that's who we're still talking about. Okay. For the ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdrawn, and shall turn back and be enraged, and take action against the Holy Covenant. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsook the Holy Covenant. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offerings. And they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant. But the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. And the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame, by captive and plunder. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. Okay? So the prophecy states that this vile person, this king who had risen up, Antiochus IV, he would come and he would attack land and people in Israel. Okay? And that eventually he would take away the daily sacrifices. He's going to set up an idol. Okay? All of this should sound very familiar. But the people of the land would have great courage during this time. Okay? It would be a time of testing and refinement for the holy people. Alright, so Antiochus IV in 169, he's defeated, right? But he's not going to stay down. He's a very, very proud person, okay? He is not going to stay down, okay? He returned from Egypt in the battle very defeated, and he vet his anger against Israel and Jerusalem. He blames them for everything, okay? Which was already taken, okay? He vet his anger against Jerusalem, which was already shaken, because Antiochus is the one who sold off the high priest positions. Okay, remember we talked about that before? The same guy. He's the one who's taking bribes to remove high priests around, okay? And he wanted the people to conform to Greek culture, okay? So it says in this, we need to focus on a couple different parts. He returned to his land with great wealth, okay? That's all he went home with at the end of the day. He went home with spoils from war. So even though he was defeated, he took some spoils from Egypt home, okay? The ships of Kittim shall come against him. This was the Romans. They brought a naval assault against him, okay? And that's who helped Egypt turn him away. And then he would take away the daily sacrifices. So 167 BC, okay? Antiochus goes into the Jerusalem temple. Remember, he's Syrian. He's not Jerusalem. He's not Jewish. He goes into the Jewish temple and he sets up an idol to Zeus, and he tries to make the people worship him as Zeus. Okay, so not worshiping Zeus. It's as if he is Zeus. Okay, I am the God of all the gods. You're going to worship me. And he sets up this temple to Zeus. Okay. And then eventually, because they're not falling in line, he decides that he's going to desecrate their temple, and he knows exactly how to do it. He sacrifices a pig to Zeus in the middle of their temple. That shuts down everything, makes it completely unclean. They cannot offer any more sacrifices. Shuts down the temple, ceases the daily sacrifices right there and then. Okay? So when Antiochus IV turned on Israel, the Jewish people now become divided. So they literally divide in half, reminiscent of what happened beforehand, the north and the south, okay? Some of them decided to completely forsake God because they did not want this to happen. This is exactly what they were trying to prevent, was war, and there's war, even though Daniel told them it was going to happen, okay? So they absolutely split. Some of them just completely give up their Jewish heritage, and they become Greek, okay? They take on the Greek mantle, and they become Greek. Okay? But there were also those who decided to go the exact opposite direction, and they dug in. They were not going to let their God be taken away from them. And they absolutely dig their heels in. Okay? This is the Maccabean Revolution. This is what we read in the book of Maccabees, is those who stood up in the face of those who were trying to take away their Jewish history, their Greek history, their culture, their people, their identity. They were fighting for their lives and fighting for their culture against Antiochus IV. Okay? So, he attacks Jerusalem, okay? And he ends up killing about 80,000 Jews. He takes 40,000 prisoner, and he sells another 40,000 as slaves. Okay? He absolutely turns his wrath on these people. He plundered the temple, and he robbed it of, in our modern estimation, about $1 billion in its treasury. Okay? And he takes it all, and he takes away these people. So 80,000 receive death, 40,000 are prisoners and are taken away, and 40 more become slaves that he sells off to other countries. Okay? And Israel is just divided into, at this point. Half of them go be Greek, half of them end up as martyrs. Okay? It's just an all-out war that's going on right now.
Is this still while Israel's being controlled by Rome?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. This is Antiochus. He's declaring war on this piece of property. Even though the Romans have it, they're fighting all of these other wars all around. So they're kind of like, leave it alone. Whatever happens, happens. It's still ours. We're getting the resource and the taxation from it, but we don't have time to go deal with that because they're fighting all these other wars going on. Okay. But Rome owns it. Antiochus is trying to fight it for it back. And he's unleashing all of his vengeance on it because he is the one who got his behind handed to him, okay? He's the one who's defeated. He's going after Israel because he's going to blame Israel for everything. Alright, 36. And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and he shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is complete. For what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. He shall honor the God of fortress instead of these, a God whom his fathers did not know he shall honor. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortress with help from a foreign God. Those who acknowledge him he shall load with honor, and he shall make them rulers over many, and shall divide the land for a price. Okay, so he sets up the god Zeus. The Zeus is actually a Greek god. He is not a Syrian god. Okay, so he throws his lot in with the Greek culture. Okay, even his fathers and his fathers' fathers did not worship these gods. They did not worship the gods of Greece. He throws his lot in, hoping to kind of, soothe Rome, soothe Greece at the same time if he's taking down Egypt, right? This guy's really, really crafty. Okay, so he declares himself God. He throws his lot in with the Greek gods, trying to pacify Rome. He's taking down Israel and Israel's God. Okay? This king would blaspheme God and exalt himself. Okay?
This is Harold the Fourth.
Still Antiochus IV, that's correct. Okay?
He's done a lot of damage.
Lots of damage. Yep.
And Ptolemy the Fifth is still king over the south, right?
Yes, because he was only 17 at the time, so he's still in charge. He's growing up and maturing through all of this, but he's also waging war in other places and going on. Yeah.
Without poor Cleopatra.
without Cleopatra. Without Cleopatra. Alright, so this terror would last for a while, God promised, but that God promised that he had appointed it and that he had a purpose for this. Okay? This is like a summary of everything that Antiochus IV did. Okay? But it is also speaking of one who would come in the future. Okay? So in Daniel 10:14, Daniel was told that this was also going to pertain to the latter days, to the last days, and would show our final dictator. Okay? So we know that everything about this prophecy has not been fully fulfilled. Okay? Antiochus fulfilled a lot of it. But not every single thing. And Jesus, who is going to come later, okay, he specifically said that the real abomination of desolation was still in the future. Okay? Remember, by Jesus' time, all this has happened. And Jesus said, everything that happened was only a taste of what's coming. Okay? This was an archetype for the Antichrist, for the one who would come. Okay? And then Paul, he paraphrases Daniel 11:36 in reference to the Antichrist, and he says, "Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away happens first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God." Okay, that's 2 Thessalonians 2, 3, and 4. So he was pointing back to Daniel and saying, Daniel told you this was going to happen. Antiochus has already done it and dead, and Paul's still saying another guy's going to do it. Okay, so they're pointing to future events. Right? So Antiochus, as bad as he was the tip of the iceberg for Israel. Okay, they were getting a taste of what was going to happen at the very end of times. All right. So verse 40. The angel tells Daniel, at the end of the time, the king of the south shall attack him. And the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen and with many ships. And he shall come into countries and shall overflow and pass over. He shall come into the glorious land, and tens of thousands shall fall. But these shall be delivered out of his hand. Edom and Moab, and the main part of the Ammonites. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall become a ruler of the treasures of gold and silver, and of all precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. But news from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with a great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his partial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain. He shall come to his end with no help to him. Okay? So, this section was not fulfilled by Antiochus IV. okay? We have no historical records of any of this happening, okay? So it kind of seems like the angel was giving Daniel all these specific events so that when they happened, Israel would go, oh, this is what it's going to be like, okay? So it's partially fulfilled in Antiochus IV. We can line his life up in a lot of these events, but not all of them. This section is not fulfilled at this time. So it's like the angel was like, here's a little glimpse, and then I'm going to give you a little glimpse of what's to come, okay? So that there would be this confederation of kings that rise up with this great leader, and with battle, they would have battle in the Holy Land, okay?
So we don't know who those kings are at this time?
No, it's really hard to tell who these people are. It seems like this is pointing to those 10 toes that we were talking about, that federation of the 10 kings that's talked about in Revelation. It seems like this is kind of a little summary that Daniel's getting a little glimpse, and then John's going to get more of it kind of flushed out a little bit. Yeah. Okay, so prophetically speaking, we cannot identify these people. We do not know who these are. It's very, very difficult to kind of point out who they are. But we know that the end will be marked by great conflict. This is all war, okay? Culminating in the world's armies gathering in the promised land to do one final battle, okay? Revelation speaks to that, okay? So the rest of Daniel 12 is going to talk about those end times. So remember, this is kind of like a summary that Daniel's getting, and then John's going to get more revelation of this summary, okay? So while history shows up a glimpse of these prophecies, there are still pieces that have not come to pass, okay? God's people, even as horrific as these events were only a taste of what's to come. Though we can be certain that God has a plan and it's going to come to pass. He tells them, this is for my purpose. And Antiochus I did a lot of damage, okay? An absolute lot of damage. The Antichrist will do even more. If you've ever even skimmed through Revelation, it's just blood and war and just death toll upon death toll. This was a little tiny peek of the damage that would happen. But they're on a short chain, okay? God tells them they only have time for a little while. Everything is going to be accomplished according to God's purpose. And at the end of this, we're told, he shall come to his end with none to help him, okay? Just as sure as it was for Antiochus IV, it will be for the Antichrist. The end of it, when God says enough, no one's going to be able to help him anymore, okay? And there will, unfortunately, be followers who are led astray, just like the people of Israel. Half of them threw their lot in. We're just going to be Greece. We're going to get it over with. They're eventually going to take us down, so we just might as well conform. And then the other half will dig their heels in, and they will be martyred for it. Okay? So this is absolutely a picture of the end times of what's going to happen. But we can trust the God who has written history in his book. He recorded this down for Daniel hundreds of years before it happened. Because remember, we're in 500 and... I forgot the day. 500 and something. This doesn't happen till roughly 282 and then down. Okay? So this is far in Daniel's future. But it's in the past now for us. Alright? So God will accomplish his will, his way. We can trust the Ancient of Days, who has the book of truth and history open before him. Okay? So, I know that was a lot of history. A lot of prophecy. But do you understand why God gave this vision to Daniel? He expected Daniel to tell the people of Israel what was coming. Remember, they're a little tiny baby nation. Okay? And by the time they become a fully fledged nation of their own, they're going to be this pawn and this back and forth and this back and forth and this back and forth. And God's telling them, I want you to trust me. I have a plan for all of this. Okay? You're just part of a bigger picture that's happening. Okay? And that this is only going to be a picture of what's going to happen at the end of times. Okay?
So where are they at in today's standard? Are they still a pawn?
Yes and no. They do have an army now. It is a rather small army,
But still
unfortunately.
very powerful.
Still a very powerful army. God has protected them, but they are still now in the middle of
They're
other dominions. Not Egypt and Syria anymore. But yeah. So it's always kind of seemed like they're this buffer country. Right? But God protects them. And God keeps them because they're still a country after all this time.
Yeah, we're still a country.
Yeah.
I just was wondering where they,
Politically fit.
I mean, I know we have the Palestine fighting over their land, but who, and then, but is there anyone else beside the Palestinian people in general that they're now like
You have
between?
Iraq and Iran and, Russia's tried to take them down a couple of times. Like, there's always people who seem to fight for this piece of land. And it's amazing, because although they have resources, they don't have all the resources in the world. There's every resource that's in Israel is found everywhere else in the world. But it does seem like this prophetic fulfillment.
Yeah, why does everyone just
Cause
always
they can't
want-
have it.
Right, well, because they
You
can't.
have it.
But,
Yeah.
well, I mean, it's still, it's,
And you're talking
still
about a piece of
mine-
property that's less than Florida.
but
It's
still
smaller than the whole state of Florida.
mind-boggling that God frightens so many people
Mm-hmm.
in a negative.
In a negative way.
Like they're so afraid of him. Like me believing him, why does it bother you if I believe him? If you don't want to believe in him, fine, don't. That's your choice.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you so offended and afraid because I believe in him?
They're going after the truth. They're taking down the truth.
And
I
still,
have a good friend that doesn't, she's a very good friend, she's like, I'm not drinking your Kool-Aid. Okay, no.
and
And
it's
she's
just,
fine with that, we're
and there's some people that are like, okay, you do you, da da da, and then but there are other people who are just so terrified. They're like, no, you believe in him, and you're so evil.
And we gotta take you down.
Right.
We have to control you. That was what this whole thing was about controlling it. We want to conquer it. We want you to make you like us, because we're so terrified of your God. If we can take you down,
They won't admit that.
if we can make you like us, we don't have to be afraid of your God. We keep you under control.
But we have to look at to see in the past of what God actually did.
Yeah.
I mean, even with the parting of the sea and all those things that happened, I mean, that's what terrified the people of
Yes.
God. I mean, ultimately.
Yeah, Rahab told him, my people saw what your God did, and we're terrified. Yeah, we're locking our gates because we don't want you to come after us, because we've seen what your God does. Yeah, your God parts seas and brings a couple million people through the desert and feeds them and gives them water every day. Our gods don't do that. Yeah, so Israel is this pawn and has always been and will always be. Unfortunately, that's also in the end times. They will become a pawn to these federation of 10 kings that will come upon this one little piece of land, and that will be the final battle.
But weren't the Jews scattered at this point?
They eventually do get scattered and brought back again. It seems to be this back and forth, because this is where it starts to kind of happen in the book of the Maccabees. They get torn apart, but they don't physically get torn apart like they did with the exile of the northern and the southern kingdom. They actually drew a line in the sand and became two different distinct people. Here it's like culturally they become. So we have the Hellenistic Jews, we have the Orthodox Jews. The ones who dug in their heels and the ones who said, whatever, we're just going to be Greek, because they'll leave us alone if we become Greek. If we do what they want us to do, if we fall in line, they'll leave us alone. All living amongst each other, still in the same country. Yeah.